Hello, I am Gamer Vince, and I'm here to talk to you about RPGs, or role-playing games. And that is tabletop role-playing games, not video games by the same name. So what is a role-playing game? How do you get into one of these? Well, essentially what it is that it is you sitting around a table with a bunch of your friends pretending to be elves. It's a lot cooler than that, trust me. But, in essence, that's kind of what it is. You get a bunch of your friends together, and you're usually going to gather around a table or some kind of play space. It could be a coffee table, it could be a nice dining room table, whatever sort of suits your needs. And you're going to take on different roles of characters. Essentially, there's two types of people that you have in a game. There are the players, which is pretty much everybody, and then you have one player, one person take on the role of Game Master. And that Game Master is essentially going to tell you a story, weave some kind of tale, and the players are protagonists in this tale. That is sort of, at its core, what every role-playing game is. Essentially what role-playing systems do is they add rules and numbers to this to make it more concrete. So that your characters can be like, so your Game Master doesn't have to be like, well, I'm going to hit something with a sword. How devastating is that going to be? Instead, role-playing systems are going to allow you to flesh out your character, give numbers to it, like my character has a 5 strength, and, the system's going to tell you exactly what that means. And Dungeons & Dragons is no exception. Essentially what's going to happen is that you're going to get a bunch of your friends together, preferably 5 or 6 of them. 4, 5, or 6, that's a good number for a game. You don't really want to do more than 7, but don't let me stop you if you have that many friends that want to join into a game. It might get a little bit problematic because there might not be enough to do for that many players in a game, but hey, if you think you can handle it, sky's the limit. I know somebody who's done role-playing games with 14 people or more. And I don't know how he does it, but he did. So that's sort of, you're going to get some people together, you're going to sit around a table, and you're going to start talking about, well, what do you want to play? You kind of want everybody's input on that, because in role-play games you have a huge variety of things you can do, and some of them might, interest you more than others. I play a lot of Dungeons & Dragons, which is a fantasy setting. Think medieval fantasy, usually high magic. What that means is that magic is sort of very present in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. But not every world of Dungeons & Dragons. There are multiple worlds. It's not just one thing. But, there's wizards and elves and dwarves and knights and kings and all that kind of thing. You're kind of familiar with it, through, like, Lord of the Rings. That would be a great D&D setting. That said, though, there are far more settings, far more different types of game systems than that. For instance, there's a lot of cyberpunk ones. Take like Shadowrun, for instance, where you're still actually playing elves and dwarves, but it's very different because instead of being a medieval fantasy setting, you're in the future and you're working for corporations in like shadowy hacking networks and things like that. So it's science fiction instead of just, fantasy. And there's everything in between as well. I know one of my favorite games is World of Darkness, where quite often you're playing like a CIA agent in the modern day hunting down vampires. That's a thing you could be doing. So you could really do whatever you want. Role-playing games, there are so many role-playing games, there's literally everything out there that you want to do, or that you can adapt to what you want to do. That's really the power of role-playing games, is that it allows you to play whatever you want. I know somebody who played in a post-apocalyptic DuckTales game, where the world ended, but it was, DuckTales. It was a lot of fun. And that's the point. So, once you have your friends together and you're sitting around the table, what do you actually do? The first thing you do is you sort of create your players are going to create characters, and they're going to put numbers to an idea of a character. Like they might say like, all right, we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I want to be a big burly fighter, or I'm going to be a crafty wizard, or what have you. I want to play an elf that's good with a longbow, or you could be like, I want to be a dwarf, I want to be drunk most of the time, and maybe I want to be a drunken monk fighter. I want to be like Jackie Chan, Drunken Master. And there are rules for that. All you have to do is figure out how to do that with the numbers that the system gives you. So what you're usually going to do is that during character creation, so all the players are going to create a character except for the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master or Game Master is the one who's running the game, and he's going to be, the storyteller. He's the one who's going to be playing all of the parts that aren't the characters. They're going to make up, the king that gives you the quest. They're going to make up the guards you beat up when you try to, rob the treasury. He's going to be telling you what happens when you run headlong into a door. So the GM is the referee and storyteller of the group. And they're not going to be playing a character, just one character. They're going to be playing everything other than the player's characters. So, but while you're creating these characters, you're essentially getting numbers to their stats to represent their various attributes. And in fact, that's quite often what they're called, attributes. Like, my Dwarven Fighter is going to have a strength of 16, which is going to result in a +3 to his strength rolls. Okay, good start. Of course, that doesn't mean anything to you yet if you're new to Dungeons & Dragons, but all you need to know usually is that higher numbers are better. That depends on the system, but usually the higher numbers are better. So like a strength of 16, I am stronger than the guy with strength 14, or the guy with, or that wizard, that pasty wizard over there with strength 8. I'm stronger than he is by, by that much. I have a +3 to my strength rolls. That guy's got a -1 to his strength rolls. So numbers. You've put numbers to your character's attributes. And then everything they do is going to be kind of whether it results in failure or success is going to depend on those numbers. So once you have your characters created, usually there's an introduction about what you're doing by the Game Master. The Game Master is going to say something along the lines of, you spent the last 3 days in a sleepy town called whatever. That's literally the name, whatever. And you heard about a wizard, an evil wizard that lives in a tower not far from the town, and you decided that the bounty is so large on his head that you're going to go pursue and turn in this wizard against his will, because evil wizard. And you've decided to walk up to his keep, and you are now in front of the dark wizard's door. What do you do? So, and at that point, now it's the character's turn. That's not a particularly good introduction, by the way. Usually you want some world building in there, but it'll do for our example. So then the other players come in, and they're going to say something that they're going to do. Like, for instance, the fighter might be like, well, I'm not particularly smart, so I'm just going to try to, smash down the door with my axe. It's what my character would do. And that's sort of the idea of role-playing. That's where the role-playing comes in. That your character is a strong dwarf. What would he do? He's a strong dwarf fighter. He solves all of his problems with his axe. So I'm going to begin smashing down my door with the axe. And then the GM, the Dungeon Master, is going to say something along the lines of either, yeah, you smash down the door, it's quite easy, it's made out of brittle wood, you get in, that's fine. Or he might say like, well, roll me an attack roll. Or roll me damage with your axe. And the system is going to have numbers for that. So let's say that, for instance, you're trying to hack your way through the door, and the DM decides, like, all right, give me an attack roll. What that means is that you're going to be rolling some kind of die to add that random element to the game. In Dungeons & Dragons, that is going to be the 20-sided die. That, by the way, is what 20-sided die looks like. And you're going to be rolling that and adding, say, your strength modifier. So my, dwarf with the +3 strength, I'm going to roll and say I'm going to roll like, well, I just rolled a 14. Can't see that, but I rolled a 14. So I would have a 17. I add the 3 to the 14, and I have now a 17 to knock down that door. And the GM might say, like, well, or the GM might think to himself, but not say out loud, I was looking for a 15. If they can beat a 15, they knock down the door. That might be in the GM's notes, or maybe the GM just made that number up because it seemed reasonable at the time. So he was looking for a 15. The dwarf got a 17, so the GM says, like, yeah, you knocked down the door. If the dwarf had rolled, say, like a 1, and his total was a 4, the 1 plus the 4, then the GM might say, like, no, your axe buries itself in the wood, but the door seems unfazed. So the axe gets stuck in the door. you're going to have to now do a strength check to get the axe out of the door. So the GM might, surprise you a little bit depending on how the dice rolled. And that is what you're going to be doing most of the time. Quite often, a lot of systems of role-playing games have an emphasis on combat, and the game changes in nature a lot in combat. Outside of combat, the dwarf might be like, all right, I'm going to swing my door at the axe. My axe got stuck. Now I'm rolled to get the axe out of the door. And then the wizard might be like, well, let me cast a spell. And meanwhile, the bard isn't doing anything. The bard's just going to sit around there and say like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go over there and try to seduce that lovely maiden over yonder. As bards do. So, in a normal storytelling kind of setting, when there's time is not of the essence, you're going to be kind of like wandering around and doing all kinds of things, and you just tell the GM what you're doing. And the GM is going to be kind of like the referee and saying like, all right, Dwarf Fighter, you've done like 90% of the stuff up till now. Give the other players a chance to do something. Like you might say like, all right, Wizard, do you want to do anything with this? And the Wizard might be like, yeah, I've actually got a spell that called make door disappear spell, so I'm going to cast that. At which point the Dwarf Fighter will be like, why didn't you do that sooner? So there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and you're going to kind of go how you want. In combat, things change. Most games have an emphasis, not necessarily an emphasis, but a lot of rules for combat. They tend to be very rigid in their combat rules. What usually happens in combat is that you take rounds. You take turns. Essentially, it's going to be like, all right, Dwarf Fighter, you're first. All right, what do you do? Now that you're done doing that, you've used your allotted amount of actions or what have you. Now other people are going to get to go, and the bad guys are going to go, and it's going to be a very rigid kind of thing. And that's going to change from system to system. So in combat, things are going to be more like a board game, where, especially in Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, where you can play with miniatures, and you're going to be moving miniatures around on a board, and you're going to be taking actions like, all right, I've got a standard action, a move action, and all that kind of thing, so I can do very, very specific set of things during this round. My fighter is going to like hit you with an axe, and there's going to be a roll for that, and after that I'm done. I'm not going to be able to do anything anymore. So in combat, things get a lot more rigid, and outside of combat, things tend to be more fluid. So that's just kind of how the game goes. So I hope that you have a little bit of an idea now of how a role-playing game is structured and how a session should look like. And there is a lot of it's going to depend on two things. One, what system you pick, and two, what your game master has in mind for a story. A story might start you out in a sleepy town hunting down a wizard, or you might start off as slaves in a gladiatorial arena trying to fight your way to freedom. Or it might be, if you're doing like a more modern game, or modern setting, I should say. In a more modern setting, you might be like a CIA agent, and you've just gotten a case to investigate in a sleepy town where there are murders. So there's all kinds of things that you can do, and that's going to determine how your game goes. There might be some games that don't have any combat in it at all, and that's perfectly fine. While there might be other games where 90% of the things you do is combat. It's just whatever you find fun. And I hope I explained that well enough that you can sort of make your own decision. Like, the first thing you want to do is figure out what system you're going to play. Then you want the GM making decisions about the story. And I'm going to have a later video about being a DM, because I know that in one of my groups, I am the forever DM. I am the dungeon master just all the time. And so I've picked up a couple of tricks that I'll share with you guys during my Dungeon Master video. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that gives you an idea of what a role-playing game is and what it should look like. I think that later on I may post an example of what a game might look like, but I hope that this has been helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed watching. Stick around for some of the other videos, especially if you want to play D&D or Pathfinder. I think that'll be a lot of help. Alright, thanks for watching.